3 monsters swore to protect me, now they're fighting to own my soul. The night the wolves came for me, the wind smelled like rain and iron. I knew before I saw them, knew in my bones the way a moth knows the lamp is a god that eats its own worshippers. The cashier's bell at Kestrel Gas clanged, thin as a toy. "Pump 4, I said, sliding a 20 across the counter. The kid behind the register stared past me, eyes going glassy, his throat working like he was trying to swallow a nightmare. I didn't turn. The glass door reflected everything I needed to know. 3 men on the forecourt. They stood at a slant to one another, like a triangle held together by tension, not trust. They didn't wear their threat, they breathed it. The tallest, black jacket, blacker eyes, had a mouth like a scar that never closed. The second leaned on a pump with a lazy arrogance that read like camouflage, danger pretending to nap. The third was too still, too clean, like winter before it remembers it knows how to kill. I knew their names because my grandmother had spoken them in a voice like a spell and a warning. Tony. Brandon. Zach. She'd said, when the debt comes due, they'll find you. And you'll know them the same way a deer knows the line where the world turns into forest and teeth. The bell clanged again when I pushed the door. Rain started with the certainty of a confession. I kept walking. My beat-up station wagon sat at pump 4 like a dog that knows it's not a wolf and is ashamed for it. Zina. The winter quiet one, Zach, said my name as if it were written on the back of his teeth. You run fast. I clicked the pump on. I walk faster. The gasoline splattered a rhythm against the tank. Behind me, the night peeled itself open and 3 heartbeats stepped out. Tony stopped 2 paces away. The scar smile didn't move. He didn't need it to. He was all edges and patience, and somehow the cold rain couldn't find him. It slid off like he'd told it to. Brandon tipped his head at the cashier, who was very carefully counting the same $10 over and over, hands shaking. You're scaring people, Z, he said, a grin as bright as a blade's reflection. You're scaring people, I corrected, but the way my heart punched said I wasn't immune to the grin. I wasn't immune to any of them, and hating that didn't make it untrue. Zach's gaze tracked the lines of me, wet hood, frayed cuffs, hands steady because I was tired of them not being steady. You smell like rain, he said, and it should have been nothing. It felt like the start of a story you tell only once. State your business, I said, because no one had ever taught me softness and I didn't want to embarrass us all by trying it for the first time in a gas station. Tony reached into his jacket and took out a small velvet pouch. The string was knotted with red thread. My grandmother's knot. My grandmother's sin. He placed it on the car roof next to the pump handle, just out of easy reach. Your bloodline owes our pack a soul, Tony said. No drama. Just meat and weather. Your grandmother promised yours to pay for a storm. My laugh startled me. A storm? What is that, some wolf accounting joke? To settle this blizzard, please remit 1 human life? She chose you, Zach said quietly. She chose you because you were the only thing she knew the moon would not refuse. Brandon's smile died. And because she believed we'd protect you from everything else. The gasoline thunked to a stop. I didn't move to pull the handle. I didn't reach for the pouch. I stared at the 3 men who smelled like pine needles and old danger and recognized the blueprint of the trap. Protection as collar. A promise that tastes like a bruise. I took the velvet pouch and slipped it into my pocket. Fine, I said. Then protect me. From you. And I got in the car. Tony was at my window before the engine choked itself awake. He placed 2 fingers against the glass like he could slow a storm by touching the pane. His eyes were a brown so deep it was almost black, and there were things in it that didn't live in human eyes. They knocked. Drive east, he said. Out of town. You'll turn on a road you won't see until you're already on it. We'll take you to Haven. You're not good at please, I said. We're not good at no, he said back. Get moving, Zina. I should have peeled out. Instead, I drove at the speed limit, both hands on the wheel like a teenager, 3 wolves pacing me at a distance, rain stitching us all together. Haven wasn't on any map because Haven wasn't exactly a place. It was a decision spread over 20 acres of old trees, a ring of cabins, and a barn that pretended it was a church when the moon was fat. We didn't rise to a gate, the road simply narrowed into a throat of alder and then widened into a clearing. My headlights yawned over wood, glass, and the kind of darkness that looks back. The station wagon coughed one last protest and died. I left the keys in it like a woman who understood she might never come back to girl things like keys and cars and steady jobs in off-brand office parks. A woman stood on the porch of the biggest cabin. She wore a sweater the color of bread and eyes the color of very old secrets. She looked at me like she'd baked me and wasn't sure the center had set. You took your time, she said, and her voice had my grandmother's cadence even if the words weren't hers. Who are you? I asked. Etta, she said. I kept you safe when you were a lump the size of a fist and you wouldn't stop screaming unless someone walked you in circles. I still remember the rhythm of the floor with you in my arms. Brandon bounded up the steps like a dog in expensive boots. She bit me when I tried to take her, he told Etta, sounding equal parts offended and impressed. Good, Etta said. Means you still have taste buds. Come inside, Zina. You're shaking. I'm fine, I said, because the lie goes down easier if you don't chew it. The cabin smelled like soap and cinnamon, like a not life I could almost want if I didn't know who owned it. A fire argued with itself in the hearth. A long table wore the detritus of a pack that pretended it wasn't a pack, mugs, a deck of cards, a knife someone had used to open a jar and then forgotten. Zach moved first. He took off his jacket, revealing a black t-shirt that made his restraint look like a weapon. He draped the jacket over the back of a chair, placed his palms on the table and looked at me like he was bracing against tide. We do this with a contract, he said. Not a collar. Terms you can bite. Tony leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a thunderhead in human shape. The moon will have its due, he said. But I'll not have it taking what isn't offered. Brandon slid a mug toward me. Honey. Whiskey. The good kind. For the shaking you're not doing. I didn't sit. I didn't drink. I let the heat touch my knuckles and said, tell me the whole story. No edits. Etta took the left-hand seat at the head of the table like she always had, I was sure, even when she didn't need furniture to sit on. Your grandmother, Nora, was born unlucky, she began. Fell in love with a man who belonged to the moon, and when the moon took him, she tried to take something back. She made a bargain with our Alpha, Tony's father. Safe passage through a winter that would have starved us all in exchange for the life most precious to her. Except she made it so the taking would wait. Wait for choice to be possible. Etta's eyes cut to me. That was the only way she could forgive herself for living long enough to bargain. The life most precious to her, I repeated, a taste in my mouth like coins. She meant my mother. She meant you, Etta said. Your mother was already gone by then. Nora saved you from the storm by offering you to it later, and making us promise to shelter you until later arrived. She sold me to weather, I said, and set the mug down very gently because smashing it would be a relief I'd have to clean up. Tony's scar-mouth twitched. She bought you time. We were the interest. And now? I asked. What's the bill? Zach's stillness changed. It sharpened. Full moon in 3 nights, he said. We can bind your soul to the pack, that's one version of payment. You live. You're protected. You never leave. Brandon's grin was back, hurt now. Or we can try something stupid and brave and likely fatal. Break the bargain without breaking you. What's the third option? I asked. Tony's eyes met mine. We do nothing. The moon takes what Nora promised. You die beautifully, like a poem that cleans up after itself. We go on with a hole in us where you should have been. I finally sat. The chair made noise like a trapped bird. I don't like any of your options, I said. Good, Etta said. Means you're still yours. The fire chose sides and threw sparks. They put me in a small room under the eaves with a bed that had known other women and a window that knew what the moon looked like across seasons. Etta brought me a stack of flannel shirts that smelled like men who weren't in them and a jar of the honey amber stuff Brandon called whiskey even when sober. You won't sleep, she said. But you might forget about not sleeping for a stretch. I don't want to dream, I admitted to the window. Then tell the dark a better story, Etta said, and left me with the shirts and the jar and the knowledge that the floorboards had been walked in circles with me once. Brandon dozed on a couch outside my door like a golden retriever who learned sarcasm and never looked back. Zach took the porch, a silent slash against the night. Tony wandered 3 times around the cabin and then disappeared into the trees like a bad idea you can't bring yourself to give up because it keeps you alive in a pinch. I didn't dream. I remembered. My grandmother's hands, a map of work. The way she cupped my face too tight when thunder banged the windows and said, "You will not be taken by any god. If I have to break the sky with my teeth, child, you will not be taken." The velvet pouch in my pocket. I took it out and loosed the knot. Inside lay a ring. It was ugly and perfect, a band of hammered silver set with a piece of smoky quartz that had never belonged in jewelry. I slipped it on and the world shifted a degree, like a compass remembering it has a north. Something old and patient turned its face toward me. The 3 heartbeats in the house answered like wolves hearing a branch crack where no branch should be. There was a knock at my door. Not soft. Not harsh. The kind that asks and assumes in the same motion. Zina, Tony said through wood. You found it. I found something, I answered. His hand pressed flat to the door. I felt the warmth through the grain. That ring was your mother's. Nora stole it from my father when he told her what he wanted. He laughed and let her. He thought it meant he'd already won. What does it do? I asked. Tony's breath sounded like weather. It chooses. Chooses what? Who belongs? The words tasted like ash from where I was sitting. From Tony's side, they sounded like prayer. It's a wolf bond. It binds you to the one you touch with it when the moon is high and your heart is crooked with wanting. That's romantic in a ruin your life kind of way, I said. He didn't laugh. It kept wolves from taking the wrong mates. It stopped us from making children with people who didn't know how to hold a wild thing without breaking it. It made us slow down enough to be sure. And if I use it, I said. What do I become? Pack, Tony said. Ours. I slipped the ring off, skin stinging where it had hugged me. No. Silence that felt like a field of knives. No, he repeated. I'm tired of belonging meaning the same thing as owed, I said. I'll burn the ring before I let it choose for me. Good, Tony said. It surprised me so badly I did laugh, quick and ugly. We only survive the moon when we call it by its right name. Which is? I asked. Hunger, he said. And hunger deserves better than law. His hand stayed on the door until my own found it, palm to palm through wood. Then he stood there longer than necessary, which is one of the new ways I learned to call a man kind. The morning bit clean. Etta fed me until I remembered the difference between hunger and wanting, then sent me outside with a coat that belonged to one of the boys and the instruction to breathe until the forest agreed to have me. The trees were old enough to despise drama. They liked the truth of sap and rot and the unreliable mercy of spring. Zach found me with my back against a cedar, counting the lines on my palms like I could read what version of me had written them. He didn't step closer than comfortable. He let the quiet introduce us. You watch people like a house with its lights off, I said. Zach's mouth tilted. I was taught that if you listen long enough, everyone tells you their favorite lie. And mine? I asked. He moved his attention from my mouth to my hands to the place just under my breastbone where fear nests and pretends it's a fact. That running is how you live. What if it is? I said. Running kept me from men who didn't understand soft isn't the same thing as weak. Running kept me from a town where the church looked at my grandmother and saw tinder. Zach came one step nearer, then another, so slow even the cedar didn't mind. Running also kept you from ever looking long enough to know who you were when no one was chasing. That's a nice line, I said, because sometimes I cover the ache with teeth. You rehearsed that in the mirror? He shook his head. In the snow. Mirrors lie. Snow tells you how heavy you are. The wind shifted. He smelled like smoke and rain and that dangerous winter before it remembers how. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulled out a small silver charm on a leather cord. A wolf's head, crudely carved. He didn't offer it. My mother made these the year the fever took half the den, he said. For the ones who made it. We didn't wear them then. We were ashamed to have survived. I kept this one for someone. Someone who what? I asked, my voice steady because I'd learned to pin it down with nails. He studied my face like you study the sky when deciding whether to plant. Someone who can hold still in a forest and not take it personal that the forest does not clap. He placed the charm in my palm. It was silly and heavy. This isn't a collar. I said. It's a promise that I will not make you into my reason for living, Zach said. I already have one. It's called not dying stupid. I slipped the charm into my pocket with the ring. They made an unholy little clatter. Tell me the stupid brave way, I said. The one that breaks the bargain without breaking me. Zach's gaze slid toward the ridgeline where the barn cut the sky like a vowel. We call it severance, he said. You stand with a foot in both worlds on the night the moon is fullest. We cut the cord connecting your soul to the debt. The pack takes the backlash in pieces. It hurts. Who does the cutting? I asked. Whoever you trust most, he said, too fast. And if I trust none of you? Then you do it yourself, he said. If you're wrong, we bury you under the cedar with your mouth full of sweet grass so the earth thinks you're something it planted on purpose. I wanted to be brave enough to laugh. I wasn't. What happens if it works? Then you're free, Zach said. And we owe you instead of you owing us. He held my gaze until it hurt. I nodded because his eyes wouldn't let me shake my head. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. Some days tenderness looks like leaving hands at your sides. Brandon found me in the kitchen stealing bread like a teenager. Etta pretended not to see, which is the only real kindness age affords. And not a crumb for the wolves, he said, leaning on the doorway with theatrical devastation. He had the kind of face that made people swing wide to make room for his grin and the kind of body that made people sorry they had. You can't starve, I said. You eat what runs. He hopped onto the counter, long legs kicking like he'd misplaced his childhood and was trying to get it back through muscle memory. We eat what consents to be eaten, he corrected. Difference between wolves and monsters. I thought you were the monsters, I said. He winked, infuriating. Only at parties. He broke the loaf with his hands and handed me the larger piece. We ate standing up, chins showering crumbs. His eyes were mischief, his mouth was math. You're thinking very loud, he said, which translated from wolf to human as I can smell your cortisol. Want to talk like an animal about it? You all want different things, I said. Tony wants to build a cage he can call a church. Zach wants to negotiate with the moon like it's a bored king who can be charmed. You want to jump off a cliff and build the parachute on the way down. He grinned around a mouthful of bread. Accurate. Except my parachute is gorgeous. Tell me why you're here, Brandon, I said. Not the pack reason. The you reason. He sobered so fast it felt like a cut. Because I was 16 when your grandmother walked into our den holding a baby and a curse, he said. Because I had been angry at a god I don't believe in for 13 years that it asked a woman with gentle hands to make a choice like that. Because I think we heal what we can reach. He swallowed the last of the bread and let his legs stop their show. Also because you smell like a storm that knows the way home. Don't do that, I said, breathless for a reason that wasn't air. Don't make me into weather. I want to be someone who misplaces her keys and leaves the milk out and says the wrong thing in the right moment. I want to be allowed to be clumsy and not have that break your story about me. Brandon hopped off the counter, closed the space until we breathed the same air, then stopped with exquisite control. Okay, he said. Then let me want that you. The ring in my pocket burned cold. I reached toward him and stopped like he had, so close I could feel the heat of his skin under the wolf. The room smelled like bread and pine smoke and the kind of trouble people regret only when they're too old to make more of it. Fade to black is a mercy when the wanting is good. We didn't kiss. We practiced stopping. It hurt less than I thought. It hurt more than I told him. He touched his forehead to mine, brief as a word you learn too late, and stepped away. Full moon in 2 nights, he said, becoming careless again on purpose. Be somewhere you can fall without breaking. It rained the whole next day, a steady, sensible rain that washed the world into a smaller palette. We scrubbed the barn and pretended it didn't care. We strung salt along the eaves and pretended salt is something other than memory that licks back. The ring in my pocket made a bruise through the denim. The wolf charm next to it warmed so slowly I didn't notice until I did, and then I couldn't unclench my fist. Etta drew the circle in the loft with chalk and ash. This is not a church, she reminded the space. This is a room with a good floor. Tony and Zach hauled a table up and covered it with canvas. Brandon insisted on flowers and returned from the edge of the clearing with a bundle of Queen Anne's lace and a guilty look that said he'd taken it from someone's private patch. Etta put the flowers in a chipped pitcher. They were ridiculous and perfect. Explain it to me again, I said, because repetition is how we make fear say uncle. Severance. Tony, who never used more words than a problem deserved, used more now. We anchor you to the human world. We anchor you to ours. We cut the thread tied to Nora's promise while keeping the threads tied to your life intact. And the cost, I said, because my grandmother had taught me the only way to avoid being devoured by magic was to ask exactly what teeth you were bartering with. Zach's jaw set. Some of it will lash back at us. Bruises. Maybe worse. Or it kills me, I said. No one flinched. Everyone did. Brandon rocked on his heels. Or it doesn't, and then we all live in a cabin and fight about chores and you teach Tony how to laugh at a joke that isn't a bad pun. Tony's mouth twitched. I laugh. On the inside, Brandon said kindly. Which is not the point of laughter. I stared at the circle until the lines stopped being lines and became the idea of a border. Who cuts? I asked. All 3 spoke at once. Me. We stared at one another, 3 wolves and a woman pretending her hands didn't need to be held. Etta saved us the trouble of choosing. Tony holds the human thread, she said. He's stubborn where it counts. Zach holds the wolf thread. He knows when to listen. Brandon cuts. Brandon blinked. Because I'm pretty? Because you're reckless with your body and careful with other people's souls, Etta said. And because your hands don't shake when you're scared. We rehearsed without the moon. We practiced how to breathe and when to say stop and who would pick me up if I fell. We made emergency plans like we were ordering pizza, quick, ordinary, with the expectation of grease and guilt. When night finally arrived, I wore Edda's plainest dress and a sweater that smelled like cedar chests and the life I might choose if I lived. I braided my hair and didn't make it neat. Zach tied leather around my upper arms to make the veins shine. Tony slid a band of iron over my wrist and whispered, "For gravity." Brandon kissed the air 3 inches from my mouth and made a joke I don't remember because the world had narrowed to breath and chalk. The moon climbed like a fact. The pack gathered in the dark below the loft, breaths a choir, the sound of bodies choosing dogs over gods. I stepped into the circle. It did not begin with pain. It began with memory. My mother singing a low song I didn't know she knew. Nora's hands warm with guilt and flour. The first time I understood that men can look at you like a forest and still chop you into useful pieces. The ring. The charm. The porch. The gas station. The rain. The 3 heartbeats that somehow were a single pulse with 3 different accents. Edda's voice braided through the memories, steady as walking with a screaming child. "Zina girl, listen to me. Put your weight in your heels." I did. The floor held. Tony's hands were at my left wrist, Zach's at my right. Brandon stood in front of me with the knife, its blade a reasonable length, its edge honed by someone who believed tools deserve respect. "What do you trust?" Brandon asked me. "Myself," I lied. "Try again," Zach said, not unkind. "Myself enough to let you help," I said. "I trust that death isn't interested in romance. I trust that the moon eats mercy and calls it communion." Tony's thumb stroked once over my pulse. "I trust the thing in us that doesn't want to be kings," he said, and it landed somewhere I didn't know I was starving. The moon found the window and poured itself into the barn. The chalk circle shone like water in a thirst story. Edda nodded. "Cut," she said. Brandon's knife never touched skin. It touched between. There is a place below the sternum where bodies keep a list of reasons. He slipped the blade into the list. The pain wasn't sharp. It was immediate and petty and huge. It reminded me of getting my ears pierced by a girl with a sewing needle and a bottle of vodka, and also of the time my grandmother said, "If you stay, your life will be the size of this town," and meant it lovingly. Something pulled. Another something pushed back. The 2 somethings realized they had been the same thing all along and threw a fit about it. The ring in my pocket burned. The charm in my pocket hummed. The iron on my wrist dragged me down as the moon lifted me up. I didn't scream. I made a noise that made Brandon swear and Tony say my name like a curse he would die to keep and Zach make a sound I have no word for because it was the sound a winter makes when it breaks and becomes river. The thread snapped. The backlash bit. It went for the men holding fast because of course it did. Tony's mouth bled and healed. Zach's eyes went yellow, then gold, then human again. Brandon's hands shook exactly once and then stilled. I fell forward. 3 bodies took me. The pack below howled, not triumph, not grief, something with edges. "Breathe," Edda commanded. I obeyed. The moon didn't collapse. It did not applaud. It simply kept being the moon. "Again," I said. "Do it again." Brandon's eyes widened. "Z." "Again," I repeated. "There's more." Nora's promise was tied to mine twice. Once to the pack. Once to the land. The realization cut me free and cut me open. She gave me to the ridgeline. She gave me to Haven. Zach swore. Tony closed his eyes like they hurt. Edda spat in the chalk and said, "Then we cut the second cord and let the land take its due from me." "No," Tony said. "From me." "From me," Zach countered. Brandon stepped into the fight with a grin that wasn't a grin. "From all of us. Split it. That's what packs are for." I didn't argue. I didn't have that kind of breath left. I put my hands back where they'd been and let the men I was learning to love take what hurt and make of it something we could live with. The knife slipped into the place where my reasons lived and touched the one that said you owe the ground your bones. Brandon cut it free. The shock went out in 3 clean strikes. Tony flinched like a man taking a punch he knew he deserved. Zach staggered and caught himself without letting go of me. Brandon's knees hit the floor and he laughed in astonishment at being hurt for something worth it. The circle went dull. The chalk was ash again. My body remembered it weighed a human amount and decided to be okay with it. Is it done? I asked, and then sleep found me like a mother does when the child has finally run out of adrenaline. I woke to the smell of smoke and bread and men who hadn't left when the making got messy. Etta sat at the table carding wool like a storybook who had decided to try a different ending this time. Brandon dozed in a chair with his head tipped back like he'd been laughing when sleep mugged him. Zach stared out the window like it owed him money and was late. Tony stood with one hand on the doorframe and his eyes on my face, the kind of guard no army pays for because no army can afford that kind of attention. Water, I croaked. 3 glasses arrived like a magic trick. I drank and let it go where it needed to. What did it cost? I asked when my ribs stopped acting like a cage for someone else's bird. Etta's mouth went thin. Tony gave a memory he was hoarding, she said. The night his father made him choose between the pack and love. Zach gave a scar he liked because it reminded him he'd survived. Brandon gave a fast he'd promised himself to finish. I looked at each of them and felt the specific shape of their emptinesses. Holes like windows, not wounds. You kept me, I said, because gratitude is a currency and I'd never been able to do math without saying the numbers out loud. Until you choose to go, Tony said. He said it slow, like the words had been living in his mouth and chewing on him for years. Or stay. On your terms. On my terms, I repeated. I reached into my pocket and took out the ring. It had gone dull, like it had done its job and wanted a nap. Brandon hissed. Careful, he said. It still works. I know, I said. That's why I'm not wearing it. I set it on the table between us. Etta didn't touch it. Tony didn't look away. Zach's gaze flicked between the ring and my face like a pendulum testing its own honesty. I'm not choosing a king, I said. I don't belong to one of you. That's not the shape of me. Brandon's grin was wicked and sweet. What's the shape of you, then? A woman who wants 3 monsters who learn to be men the hard way, I said. A woman who wants a pack and a door she can leave through when she needs to remember she has legs. A woman who wants to be greedy without being eaten for it. Zach's shoulders moved, a release only a watcher would notice. Greedy is allowed, he said. Tony stepped forward. His hand hovered over the ring. Then say it, he said. Say the terms. Consent, I said. Every time, for everything, in words if there's even a sliver of doubt. Consent, Tony echoed, like an oath carved into bone. Choice, I continued. I choose each of you and you choose me. No choosing for me because you're afraid I'll choose wrong. Choice, Zach said, eyes steady. Care, I said, and my throat hurt. I don't want worship. I want the dishes done, and the knife put back where knives live, and someone to tell me when I'm being cruel because I mistake honesty for a weapon. Care, Brandon said, with a seriousness I hadn't seen on him before. I sucked air into a body that was mine again. No crowns, I finished. No altars. No debt. We make a family out of want and practice. Etta laughed into her wool. There's my girl, she said, and I only cried a little. We learned each other the way people learn weather after a move. What storms to expect. Where to stand when the house leaks. What heat means in this climate. Tony made routes. He walked the perimeter with me until my legs found a stride that wasn't running. He showed me the places the land softened and the places it pretended softness to trick the unwary. He didn't talk much. When he did, the sentences settled like stones in a pocket. We made a ritual of quiet. In quiet, he remembered how to not be a wall. In quiet, I remembered how to want without apologizing. Zach taught me names. Trees and tracks and the difference between an owl asking for permission and an owl telling the mice to give up. He gave me the wolf charm back after I tried to return it, and this time I kept it without pretending it meant less because that made it easier. He pressed my back to a cedar and took my hands and breathed with me until my ribcage stopped feeling like a door a god might knock on. Brandon built me muscles I didn't know how to use. He made me hold a plank until I cursed him and then laughed when I meant it. He kissed the air not because we needed not to kiss but because he liked the practice of stopping. We got very good at stopping. We got very good at deciding not to. Fade to black is a kindness but also a limitation. I'll say it this way, when the heat came, we met it like adults. We didn't make anyone into a prayer. We didn't turn pleasure into a hinge for power. We made a home out of the noise. On the second Friday after the severance, the pack dragged tables into the clearing and ate with their hands. Someone roasted a pig because meat soothes when there's been trouble. Children, wolves, human, the kinds of wild things that don't have names yet, ran between knees and learned to be loud in safety. Etta braided my hair on the porch and hummed a tune I recognized as the one she'd walked in circles to when I was a storm in arms. Tony sat with his back to the door like always, not because he was afraid but because that's where his body had learned to rest. Zach let two children climb him like a tree and pretended not to like it while liking it like it would save him if he let it. Brandon arm wrestled anyone with the audacity to bring their elbows to his table and was surprised and delighted when Etta beat him. When the moon rose, nobody howled and nobody prayed. People did what people do at night when the day has been enough. They kissed. They cleaned. They fell asleep in chairs. They let their heads be heavy on shoulders that did not flinch. I took the ring from the table where we'd left it in a saucer and carried it into the trees. I dug a hole with my hands and a stick. Tony found me and did not ask to help. He offered the stick without commentary when mine broke. "You're not going to bury it," he said, not as question. "No," I said. "I'm going to plant it." I put the ring in the earth and covered it. "If something grows, I'll make tea with it and we'll drink it when we forget what we promised." The dirt was damp and smelled like the underside of a leaf. Zach came like the night coming on and put a small stone on top of the place. Brandon tied a ribbon on a twig and shoved it into the mound because he was incapable of letting a ritual be tidy. We stood there with our hands not touching and our hearts admitting how close they were. Peace is a practice. So is danger. The world does not stop testing because you ask nicely. We were at the farmer's market in the valley when they came, wearing human faces that fit badly. Wolves from the next ridge, led by a man who never learned the difference between alpha and bully. He smiled at me and the milk in my hand turned sour. "Det turns, Nora's girl," he said. "You broke a bargain that fed more than this little patch of trees. You think the moon only eats you? You think it won't come to dine at my door next?" Tony stepped between us before I knew I needed him to. "Take it up with me," he said. "Or with the moon. Zina is not your invoice." The bully's eyes slid over Tony and stuck on me, like a wasp that can't resist a mouth. "You smell like 3 promises," he said. "Greedy." Aloud, I said, before fear could tighten my throat. Brandon was suddenly at my shoulder, smiling like a man who knows how to fight with joy. "Is that a complaint or an invitation?" he asked the bully. Zach stood on my other side and did nothing that looked like violence. He looked like weather waiting. Sometimes that's worse. The man sniffed, trying to learn our doorways. "We could use new blood," he said. "You, girl. And maybe the pretty one." He flicked his fingers at Brandon. The market went quiet. People like produce stood still. Etta arrived with a head of cabbage like a weapon and placed it gently in my arms, the way women pass babies to other women when men are about to embarrass themselves. Tony's voice could have cut paper. Leave. No, the bully said, because some men cannot hear words shorter than threats. He took a step toward me, and 3 wolves and 1 woman decided at the same time to stop being polite. We didn't shift. There are places for teeth and fur, between the radishes, and the soapmaker is not one. We moved like people who knew the difference between breaking a jaw and breaking a law. The bully tasted blood. He counted his teeth with his tongue and found he still had most of them. He looked at me again and saw something he hadn't known how to see until a woman didn't move for him. Greedy, he spat again, as if maybe the word would become a magic if he made it hurt. Brave, Etta corrected. He left with less grace than he'd brought. The market breathed. Brandon bowed to the soapmaker for reasons that were mostly flirting. Zach bought me honey. Tony asked if I wanted the cabbage or if Etta had pressed a baby on me. We went home not victorious but intact. That night, I slept between 2 men and dreamed of a third walking the perimeter with a wolf at his shoulder that was not his but walked with him anyway. When I woke, the kitchen smelled like bread and the floor remembered how to be walked in circles to calm a child. Winter tested the roof. That's how it asks if you meant it when you said home. We meant it. We patched leaks. We put buckets under the places that would take more than a patch. We learned who was better at which kind of mending and let them be good at it instead of insisting on fairness like a religion that eats its own children. The pack brought me small problems because small problems are a way a community says, stay. A boy with teeth too fast who wanted help learning to slow instead of shatter. A girl whose wolf would not come when called because the body it lived in had been told no too many times. An old man who did not remember the person he'd been married to for 50 years and needed someone to remember for him for a while. I didn't fix anything. I held. Sometimes that's the right verb. Tony brought me coffee and didn't ask if I wanted it. He'd counted. Zach walked me to the boy's mother and reminded her that fear is not the same as prophecy. Brandon taught the girl to box until her wolf decided she could be trusted with her own paws. We fell into a pattern that made sense to our bodies even when our brains tried to narrate it into a prettier story. We fought. We did dishes. We swore and apologized and found better words. We made heat and we made room and we made a life. On the first clear night in a string of storms, I pulled the ring from the earth. The mound had sprouted a small fierce plant with leaves like coins. I didn't make tea. I tucked the ring into a drawer with socks and left the plant on the windowsill where it could watch me forget and remember. I went down to the winter garden where the world had the decency to be asleep. Tony joined me, then Zach, then Brandon, none of them with shoes, each of them with a different kind of shiver. I want to say it, I said to the 3 monsters who had learned to be men on purpose. The thing I stopped my mouth from making into a hymn because hymns scare me. We're listening, Zach said. I love you, I said. Not the you from Nora's story. Not the idea of you I wrote when I was lonely. The you who buys too much honey. The you who stares at doors. The you who pretends he can't be beat by an old woman at arm wrestling. I love you in a way that makes chores lighter and wolves kinder and the world less in the mood to eat me. Brandon wiped his face like the cold had made his eyes water. Tony looked away because looking stayed a muscle he was learning to stretch without tearing. Zach stepped into me and let the winter smell like something we could drink. We kissed without urgency. We went to bed without performing an ending. Spring came the way it always does, ridiculous and inevitable. The plant on my windowsill put out a small flower that looked like it wanted to be a coin when it grew up. The bully from the market sent a letter that couldn't decide if it was a threat or a courtship. We burned it without reading it out loud. Etta began a sweater that had too many sleeves and pretended it had been a joke from the start. At the first new moon after the thaw, we walked to the ridgeline and lay on the rocks where the land had once claimed me. It didn't anymore. It considered us and decided we were interesting. That felt like victory. Tell me a future, I said, the same way I'd asked before in a different house. Brandon went first because he usually didn't. We get a dog, he said. Not a wolf. A stupid, perfect dog. We name it something very dignified like Professor. Zach hummed. We teach the children to listen to snow, he said. And to not take bad bargains just because the person making them says the sky is collapsing. Tony took a long time. We take the ring out once a year, he said, and lay it on the table and look at it and remember that we can choose each other again or not. And if one of us ever cannot choose, we bless that truth and we grieve and we let go. I breathed around the hurt and found it was a clean hurt, like working a sore muscle that would make you stronger if you didn't turn it into a reason to stop. Okay, I said. Yes. We went home and did the dishes. We went to bed and rehearsed stopping and didn't, because sometimes the right practice is to let something happen all the way. I don't believe in endings anymore. I believe in threads. I believe in the way wolves learn to move around furniture and grief and still be wolves. I believe in a ring on a windowsill and a plant that learned how to coin itself. I believe in Etta's sweaters and Brandon's bad jokes and Zach's quiet and Tony's patience breaking open into laughter that sounds like a door no longer barred. But if you want an ending, I can give you a last scene with a window open. It is summer. The market is noisy with peaches and babies and a band that can only play 3 songs but plays them like each has a different sky at the end of it. Tony is bargaining for too many onions. Zach is teaching a child how to tell the difference between coyote scat and the neighbor's dog's opinion. Brandon is flirting with a woman in a hat and buying soap that smells like rosemary and regret. I am at a table with Etta, eating a honey stick and pretending not to drip it on my dress. The bully from the ridge comes. He comes with 2 men and a hard mouth. He stops 10 paces away because there are rules and because he learned something from losing his teeth the last time. Nora's girl, he says. You any happier for your cleverness? Yes, I say. He looks at my men like he's counting hooks. You think having 3 leashes is freedom? Etta snorts. Boy, you think those are leashes? Those are hands. Those are hands that can hold without hurting. He goes away because cowards love an ending where they get to slam the door. We let him go because victory sometimes looks like not spending your afternoon wrestling a pig that enjoys mud. We buy peaches. We go home. Brandon names a stray cat Professor because he refuses to wait for a dog. Zach reads me a field guide to moths and doesn't correct me when I cry over the ones that die the day they learn to fly. Tony kisses me on a porch where the floorboards have known us since we were carried crying, and he presses his forehead to mine and laughs into my mouth, and I taste onions and something we planted together. At night, the house sleeps quietly now. It learned. It lets us. When I walk the halls, the moon follows at a respectful distance like a neighbor carrying a casserole who has finally learned we are not interested in visitors after 9. I pass 3 men breathing. 1 sigh. 1 wordless hum. 1 soft Zina. I look out the window and the land doesn't ask for a debt. It offers a season. I take it. I go back to bed. This is not the end. It is a place where we decided to rest. The story goes on because we do. And when the dark asks for my soul again, I will let 3 monsters answer the door with their hands, not their teeth. We will be greedy. We will be kind. We will choose. And in the morning, we will argue about coffee and fix the hinge that squeals and tell the moon we are busy building a life and it can come back later if it knows how to knock. The end.